Today we're on to the story of Noah's Ark, which is Genesis chapters 6 through to 9. I think this is one of the stories that people are broadly more familiar with, but I'll run through it quick anyway. From the dates in the Bible, it appears to have taken place something like 1600 years after the events of Adam and Eve, and puts it roughly 4,000 years ago. It jumps from Cain and Abel through that lineage in chapter 5 I talked about, I didn't particularly understand, into the story of Noah's Ark. So it seems that for this whole period of 1600 years, human beings have just been absolutely diabolical. And then it's stated in the story of Noah's Ark that God regrets the creation of humanity and decides the only way to deal with this is just to kill everybody, including the animals, oddly enough. It is stated that the intention is to kill the animals. Not clear why on that. But anyway, Noah is seen as a righteous man, so he and his family are exempted from this. So God tells him, go and build yourself a big ark, put a load of animals on there, put your family on there. It then rains for 40 days and 40 nights. The flood waters last around about 5 months. And then Noah and his family all pop out, and it's their job to restart the human race. Again, with the sort of similar problems of Adam and Eve being a start point, we've now got still a small number of people restarting the human race, so sceptical. There's a bit more to the story that I hadn't realised, in that Noah goes off and plants a vineyard, gets absolutely hammered and falls asleep in the buff one night. His son Ham comes in and finds him there and then toddles off to tell his brothers, presumably some sort of gossiping sort of thing. Then Ham's brothers Shem and Japheth come in with their backs turned, cover up their father, and in the morning Noah wakes up with a stonking hangover, presumably, and curses Ham's son. It's interesting. I mean, clearly Ham running to tell his brothers that's not the most gentlemanly of conduct, but it's interesting that Noah curses his own grandson. Not quite sure what that curse entails, to be fair. But I suppose that's just some of the culture back then, in terms of if this person does something wrong, you curse their family. This is the first part of the Bible. In my head, I anticipated maybe there could be an element of literal truth to this. I didn't know much about whether there's been catastrophic floods. But then reading the account, I don't think that holds up for a few reasons. One being just the sheer volume of water. It was said that the highest mountain in the world, presumably Everest, was covered by something like 6.8 metres, I think it was. I think there's a problem there, in the sense that where did all the water come from? I mean, even if you melt all the global ice caps, rain is just seawater. It's evaporated and come back down again. It's not like there's new water introduced to the planet and taken away again. So I'm pretty sure there's not enough water here to do that. Granted, I'm not geology or whatever that study would need to be to know that. But that doesn't seem to make a great deal of sense. There's also the problem of dates. So I'm not a historian, got to put that out there, but my understanding is the Egyptian civilization, well, there's still an Egyptian civilization, isn't there? But the pharaohs and pyramids, all that part, ran from roughly 5,000 years ago to roughly 3,000 years ago. So a 2,000 year period where Noah's Ark sits somewhere about the middle of it. If the flood really covered the entire earth for 5 months, that would have wiped out the entire Egyptian civilization in the middle of their heyday, and it would only have got restarted again once Noah's family had restarted the population and they had spread as far as Egypt. So historically there would seem to be some problems here. I gather there is some evidence for a cataclysmic flood around about 4,000 years ago. So clearly there's some potential there in terms of where this story might have come from. On some level it may have been true. But for a fully global, humanity wiping out flood 4,000 years ago, that would seem pretty clear that that's not going to be a thing. In terms of the moral of the story, it would seem to be about God's frustration with humanity, who creates this species with consciousness to be a higher level of relationship with God than we can have with animals. And it's just not gone well at all. Almost 2,000 years of people killing each other. And to be fair, the bad behaviour of humans in those 1,600 years between Cain and Abel and Noah is not gone into in any detail. But clearly it's wickedness and all that sort of thing. So it's just, things are not being good. And God has had to put up with that for 1,600 years. And eventually just says he's had enough. So that's the idea, is that God can be regretful, angry enough to commit global genocide. Yeah, there's interesting stuff in there. There is an interesting part in there that after the floodwaters recede, God makes this covenant with Noah, and a one-sided covenant at that. It's not, you must do this and then I will do that. It's just straight up, I will never again destroy the humanity and all the animals with a global flood. There's an interesting wording thing in there. I mean, it's maybe do it with fire, that could be fine, but it is stated that never again will the whole of humanity be destroyed by a flood, which is interesting in the sense that that was presumed to suggest that God has some sort of confidence that things are going to be better this time. It's not clear where that confidence would come from. Obviously, if you're God, you know everything. But that begs the question of, we created Adam and Eve, would have known presumably that the next 1,600 years were going to be disastrous. I think therefore we have to say again, this is clearly not literal, or at least there may be an element of truth in it, in terms of it does seem there was some serious flooding at some point in history. But again, it doesn't really make much sense, I don't think. So it would seem again to be a metaphor for just the problems of humanity, in terms of just how bad we can possibly be and what is God supposed to do about that. So again, it's all very clever storytelling in the sense that it's not much is being said, but then there's clearly a lot to unpack in it. And again, I realise I'm not going into any massive depth here. This is just a guy reading stories and sharing his initial thoughts on it. So that's the story of Noah. Next time on to another lineage piece, it seems, and then on to the Tower of Babel.